Good evening, everyone. Okay, let's do this again. Good evening, everyone. That's much better. So my name is Emmanuel Echampon, and I am a professor of history and of African and African American studies. I also serve as one of the PIs for the Gulf of Guinea Climate Research Cluster. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the keynote lectures. We have a duo, and we're looking forward to that. So let me invite forward, let me sort of give you a sense of what we will do. So I'll invite my colleague, Caroline, and Caroline will come and introduce Prabhu, and then Prabhu will speak. And then I'll come back and introduce Joseph Onoja, and Joseph will speak. And then we'll sit with them and we'll moderate a conversation with you. So that's the plan. So let me invite Caroline back here up now.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. I know it's been 2 intense and very productive days. But it's good to have something to keep us energized this evening. And I know we're in an auditorium, but I hope this will be informal as well. So, you know, we'll be doing Q&A, and I hope to have a lively discussion. I'm a professor of epidemiology and one of the PIs on the South Asia Climate Research Cluster. And it's my pleasure to introduce Prabhu Pingali, not Pingale, as I was misinformed, who is a professor of applied economics and management at Cornell. And he has a joint appointment in the Division of Nutritional Sciences in the Department of Global Development. He's also the founding director of the Tata-Cornell Institute for Agriculture and Nutrition. And I think his work is going to fit very well into some of the themes, the cross-cutting themes that we've been discussing the last 2 days about the multifaceted nature of the threats faced by the most vulnerable communities in relation to climate change. Before Cornell, he was the deputy director of the Agricultural Development Division of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and before that at the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. He's also a member of the US National Academy of Sciences. And so today, Professor Pingali is going to discuss some aspects of how we align our goals around some of these major problems with a focus on the issue of nutrition. And so please welcome Professor Pingali.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction, and it's a great pleasure to be here. I've been planning to come and visit the Mittal Institute for many years now, and so this has been a great opportunity to come and identify collaboration in the future. Let me start by giving you a 2-minute spiel on the Tata-Cornell Institute. The Tata-Cornell Institute is a standalone research center which is part of the College of Agriculture at Cornell University. It was set up with a very generous gift by Mr. Ratan Tata. And our focus is on doing research on food systems transformation, and looking at mechanisms to make food systems more sustainable, more nutritious, and more climate resilient. And so that's been the very core of what we've been doing at Cornell, at the Tata-Cornell Institute. And some of what I'll be talking about today is very much focused in that area. Almost all of our work is focused on India, and all of our PhD students spend a year doing field research in India. So we're very proud of making our students do field-based research, but that leads to academically rigorous, high-quality PhD theses coming out of Cornell University. So that's my spiel. So let me now talk about the topic of today. As part of the work that we've been doing on food systems transformation, I've been really intrigued by the fact that food systems are responding to various challenges. Challenges around sustainability, around nutrition, around climate, etc. And each of these challenges are being addressed by different groups, different sectors, and very much in silos. And so my interest has been to see how do we get movement across silos? How do we get to look at solutions that cut across silos? And it's important because when you think about sustainable development goals, each of the sustainable development goals has a very laudatory purpose, a very laudatory goal, but it's very much sector-driven, very much driven in terms of one particular sector. And the Sustainable Development Goal 2 around hunger and malnutrition is very much a case in point. It's focused on reducing global hunger, but using agriculture as a means of doing that and increasing agriculture productivity. And while addressing agriculture productivity, there are significant externalities associated with it. Pollution issues, degradation issues, climate impact issues that need to be addressed. But they're not as much because the very focus is on let's get hunger reduced. Similarly, when you think about climate goals and we think about the Paris Agreement and keeping temperature rise to under 2 degrees, very important goal, but very much focused on how do you bring temperature, the rise in temperatures down, but doesn't really look at what happens to the implications of that for hunger reduction or for any of the other sustainable development goals. Now, many countries have subscribed to the zero net emissions targets. India as a country has said, yes, we would like to do that by 2070. But there's no real plan on how do you get there? And how do you get there without addressing these trade-offs? So we're all in these silos. And when you're in a silo, you don't really know what the other silos are doing. Maybe at the top, the senior management or the Prime Minister's office has a good idea of what all the different groups are doing, but the groups themselves don't have a good approach. And as long as you're in these silos, the trade-offs are hard to manage. And so what we'd like to do is to say, is there a way to manage the trade-off? And my specific question is, can we achieve both zero hunger and net zero emissions together? Is there a way to bring these two together and achieve both goals? And that's something that I've been thinking about and I've been worrying about for a while now. Why am I interested in both of these issues and why Asia? Well, when you think about hunger, Asia has made enormous progress, but Asia is still home to the largest number of hungry people. Not so much in proportion, but certainly in terms of absolute numbers. In absolute numbers, Asia holds more than 50% of the global hunger. And that's an important issue. And that number is stubbornly high and will continue to be high with population growth and slow reduction in overall poverty in Asia, and particularly in South Asia. And so hunger will be an important issue way into the future. And as climate change affects agriculture productivity, the areas which are fragile, low productive environments, areas which tend to have higher concentration of hungry people, will be affected adversely in terms of overall production and productivity and exacerbate the problem of hunger. So that's why I think addressing hunger in a climate context is important. So why are we interested in greenhouse gas emissions? Greenhouse gas emissions are an important part of the overall environmental degradation that's taking place across the world. And when you think about emissions coming out of the top 5 emitting countries, 3 of them are in Asia: China, India, Japan. And the levels of emissions under business as usual scenario will see Asia continuing to be the top emitter in the world. And we need to address that if we want to look at ways in which we can arrest long-term increases in temperature and long-term climate impacts. And where are these emissions coming from? There's a lot from the energy sector, transport sector, etc., but agriculture plays an important role. Agriculture accounts for anywhere between 20 to 30% of total emissions. But what's important about agriculture, I think, is captured in these slides here. I don't know whether I can show that. If you look at OECD countries, the share of emissions coming from enteric fermentations from livestock is high, but then land use change accounts for a major part of the emissions. So if you're thinking about priorities for emission reduction in OECD countries, you focus on livestock and land use change. But then it turns out that many donors would use the same priorities for other countries and the same priorities for Asia. And they miss out one of the largest emitting sources in Asia, which is paddy rice cultivation. Paddy rice cultivation has high levels of methane emissions. And unless you look at Asia specifically, you would miss out the priority of having livestock and rice as the two big emitters and looking at ways in which you address them. So that's what we've been looking at. We've been looking at the two big emitters, livestock and rice in Asia, and then saying, how do we reduce that? So why rice? Well, we all know rice is the most important, or one of the most important staples in Asia, depending on where you are. And rice consumption continues to rise, even as per capita rice consumption is dropping because of income growth and because of diversification of diets. On an absolute basis, rice consumption continues to rise. And because of that, the need for increasing rice productivity, the need for increasing overall rice supplies towards 2050 continues to be very important. And so the focus of the food security community has been very much on increasing productivity of rice. But as that productivity rises, there's a risk of increased emissions, methane emissions from rice paddies. Now, there are ways to reduce that, and that's something I'll be talking about. Livestock is very important also. As incomes are rising, the demand for livestock products is rising also. Dairy products, milk products, meat, rising very rapidly across Asia. And livestock is a major emitter also of methane and greenhouse gas emissions. But the way you manage livestock in Asia is very different from the way you manage it in OECD countries. These are small-scale livestock systems, people with 1 or 2 cows, etc. And so the issue is, how do you increase productivity of livestock systems, but at the same time reduce emission levels? So what I want to do is to give you some ideas on how one can get to this goal of zero hunger and net zero emissions. And there are 3 ways you can do this. One way you do this is, within a particular system, try to improve overall efficiency of the system. The second way is you transform the system. And the third way is you bring in synergies from outside the system, outside the sector. And let me talk through all of that. So in terms of increasing efficiency within the system, I think rice has some enormous potential. One can increase overall input efficiency in rice through improved nitrogen use efficiency, for overall fertilizer use efficiency, water use, water management. You can actually reduce water use by more than 50% without sacrificing yields through alternate wetting and drying systems, better water management systems, etc. and through zero tillage systems. Zero tillage systems can then reduce energy use, but also incorporate more of the organic matter into the soil, enhancing overall carbon stocks, etc. So these are ways in which one can look at improving efficiency. So why aren't we doing it? The technologies are there. Why aren't we doing it? Well, as long as the incentives at the farm level are not there because of high levels of subsidies for fertilizers, for water, for power, etc., farmers don't have the incentives to make the change. And so there's a big political economy issue here around how do you get a change in the current regime of subsidies in order to make agriculture more efficient, but also more climate friendly. And that's a challenge that we need to look at. But there's other ways to think about this. That is to diversify out of rice systems, to look at going into production of millets or vegetables or agroforestry products, etc. And there's a big project we're doing in a state called Chhattisgarh in India, where we're looking at ways to move from rice to millets and what are the constraints to making that switch. That then addresses some of the diversity in diets that are taking place and enhancing the supply of diversity, but it also reduces emissions coming from the rice system. In livestock, there are some very interesting opportunities that climate scientists haven't thought about as relating to climate. For example, one of the ways to improve overall efficiency in livestock is to improve the productivity per animal, better breeds that increase the productivity of milk or meat, etc. So improving the breed, but you're also changing the sex composition of the breed. So in the case of dairy, you're trying to increase the share of cows relative to male cattle. By doing that, you're improving the overall efficiency of the herd and reducing stray cattle. And so artificial insemination with sex-sorted semen is one clear way in which one can make that happen. And it's very common in OECD countries. But in OECD countries, you target male cattle for beef production. Now in India, you would do the same thing, but target female for cows because you're focused on dairy. And by doing that, you improve the efficiency of the herd, but you're also being climate friendly. And bringing sex-sorted semen into the climate discussion is a really important example of this cross-sectoral synergies that need to be in place. The other area that I'm really excited about is called agrovoltaics. There's a lot of discussion around solar power and the use of solar power in agriculture, and there's water pumping, etc. But the real challenge is how do you bring in solar power without sacrificing area under production? In smallholder systems, that's very important. And the way you do that is through manipulating the solar panels, placing them in different ways, modeling cropping systems that can work under shade, etc. And that's what agrovoltaics is doing. Agrovoltaics is taking off all over the US. It's a big part of New York State agriculture. And that's a way in which I'm excited about thinking about this in India. And we're working with the Solar Energy Alliance in India and organizing a workshop in Delhi to look at the state of art in agrovoltaics in India coming up this December. And we're looking at ways to pilot some projects in this area looking forward. Now, a lot of the issues that we look at, there are solutions out there already. But adopting these solutions has been quite slow. Part of it is the silo nature that I talked about. Part of it is access to the technologies, especially for small farmers. And part of it is because of that last mile delivery problems that technologies have in terms of access, the economics of it, institutional barriers, structural barriers, etc. And these are things that we've talked about for decades with various technologies, and we're still trying to sort them out. And so it'll be the same set of issues that will come up when you think about climate-friendly technologies also. So my last point that I want to make is, so what's the path forward? So the path forward has several components to it. The first, of course, is we need a policy environment that's more conducive to cross-sectoral synergies. And that's not easy. That's not easy because there's very strong entrenched interests that want to keep the policy environment the way it is today, with high levels of subsidies going to certain sectors. So changing that scenario is a big part of getting to a more climate-resilient agriculture system and a more climate-friendly agriculture system. And then being able to target by specific agroecologies. In the state of Bihar, we're doing work around zero hunger, zero carbon. But even for a state of Bihar, there are 4 distinct agroecologies, which require very distinct interventions. And so there's no global solution to addressing these problems. It's very, very local, and we need to be able to figure that out at a local level and a regional level. And look at the stakeholders. You know, the solutions for small farmers is very different from the solutions for larger farmers. And in small farm agriculture, the challenge of getting to a net zero emission agriculture is enormously complicated. And because of that, you need to have a process of planning and program implementation that includes small farmers. Being inclusive of the community we're working with actually helps us design better programs. And that's something we all talk about, but in reality, it's not common practice. And that's where we need to be. And finally, putting in place monitoring and evaluation systems that keep track of progress we're making mid-course corrections, etc., is really important. Let me stop, by advertising our latest paper, which is coming out, which looks at food, agriculture, and nutrition in South Asia, which goes through a lot of these issues in great detail. We also have a standalone piece on food, agriculture, nutrition in India, and one on the state of Bihar, and again, trying to look at this zero hunger, net zero emissions issues. And for all other publications from our center, you can find them on our website. Thank you so much, and I hand over back to the moderator.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. Let me introduce Dr. Onoja. So Dr. Joseph Daniel Onoja is the Director General of the Nigerian Conservation Foundation, and he's an experienced professional in the field of conservation biology and environmental management. He's an alumnus of the U.S. State Department's International Visitor Leadership Program on Protected Planet from 2017. Dr. Onoja holds a PhD in conservation biology, which he earned from the AP Leventis Ornithological Research Institute of the University of Jos in Nigeria, in collaboration with St. Andrews University in the United Kingdom. This educational foundation has directed his expertise in the conservation of biodiversity. As I mentioned, he currently serves as the Director General of the Nigeria Conservation Foundation. In this role, he oversees and leads the organization's efforts in the various areas of conservation actions. Dr. Onoja serves as a statutory board member of the National Forestry Trust Fund and the Nigeria Park Service. He's also a member of the National Council on Climate Change, highlighting his involvement in climate change policy and initiatives at the national level. He's the national coordinator of the annual waterbed count along the East Atlantic Flyway. He serves as the West African regional coordinator of the key biodiversity areas, which emphasizes his commitment to identifying and safeguarding critical biodiversity sites. His extensive educational background and professional experience makes him a prominent figure in the field of conservation biology and environmental management in Nigeria. So his leadership at the Nigerian Conservation Foundation has led to significant contributions to biodiversity and conservation and environmental protection in the country. He has been tracking the coastal erosion happening on the Lekki axis of Lagos, and he hosted us when our group visited the Lekki conservation site in Lagos in July. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Joseph Onoje.
Thank you very much. So, good evening. As rightly pointed out, I am Joseph Onoje, and I'm the Director General of the Nigerian Conservation Foundation. And a bit about the Nigerian Conservation Foundation: we are a membership-based organization and a member of the BirdLife International Partnership, one of the 120 members in 116 countries in the world. So it's a pleasure for me to talk to you today about recalibrating sustainability, living with climate change realities in Nigeria. And I'll be looking at it from three different aspects. But first of all, I will take you through the story, the journey of the coastal erosion that we have been monitoring. But when we talk about climate change in Nigeria, what comes to mind? What does climate change look like in Nigeria? This is one of the numerous pictures that came up during the last year's flood that happened when Cameroon opened the Lakdo Dam, and then it was flooded all the way to the Niger Delta. Now you see homes like this. I can relate with these because this is one of my sites that I visited very regularly. And then pictures like this keep on streaming from the field. And the worst part of it was that corpses were being exhumed from the graves, talking about epidemiology. So you can see the health implication of the reality of what is happening on the ground. That is just one of it. You talk about farmer-herder clashes, and these are kind of the news headlines that you see very regularly. When the northern part of the country is getting drier and the Fulani herdsmen need to move, usually the movement is not coordinated, is spontaneous, and there's no negotiation. And when they move, they don't normally move in an organized fashion. They moved, and when they move to a place, they go to a place where it's not vacant, it's not vacuum. They go and meet farmers. And then there's this farmer-herder clash. Now, forgetting about the politics, the ethnicity, the religious component of it, underneath all of this is the issues of climate change, because their livelihoods are being threatened. Areas of grazing are no longer arable. are no longer as they should be when they are grazing. A typical example: I was watching a documentary some days ago about what was happening in the Masai Mara region of Kenya. The men are losing their ability to provide for their families. A particular household was highlighted because overnight his cattle were dead, and all of a sudden he didn't have anything to provide for his family. His wives had to step in to be able to be the ones to provide for him, and he had high blood pressure and he died, leaving her with so many children to take care of. These are some of the realities of climate change. But today I want us to consider the reality of climate change when it comes to coastal erosion, and the coastal erosion that we have been following for about 7 years now. Now, this is the map of Lagos. Maybe this light, if the light can go off a bit. So this is the map of, the Google image of Lagos. We started pulling out this Google image. It got to a point. So this is called the Commodore Channel. It was opened in the early 1900s by the Brits when they needed vessels to go into the port. So we have the Apapa port and we have the Tinkan Island port. So over time, this was being replenished, but it was abandoned. And there was serious coastal, erosion gradually, until this highbrow area was being threatened. In Lagos, one of the most expensive cities to live in Nigeria, and VI is one of the areas with very prized property. So imagine what is going on in this place before this was done. And at the same time, when we took that picture in the year 2000, this was down the road going towards the eastern part of the coastal line. And I want you to put your focus on this house, because it's going to be very important as we go on in our discussion. And this is about 13 kilometers from VI to that point. And then we started tracking it. So, sampling of the Eco-Atlantic City, they call it Eco-Atlantic City. It was made mention by Prof this afternoon when he was talking about the fact that even the US consulate is going to be having the land there. It's very prized. I think as at the last time, a plot of land there is about ₦1 billion. Based on the exchange rate, it will be something maybe $100 million or something, some crazy amount. So they started filling it up. And while that was going on, filling continued, we started experiencing, based on the Google images that we're seeing, erosion started happening. Now, while this erosion was happening, this estate was owned by one of the prominent families in Lagos, from the chieftaincy family. And he was a commissioner of works at that time. So they were able to start building groins to be able to protect the estate. But that went on. Meanwhile, the house I pointed out is here. And then you can see that the effect, we have reduced the shoreline to 72 meters. Okay? So within 13 years, you can see what happened here. There was a coastal road. There were coconut trees here. All the coastal road is gone. All the coconut trees are gone. And just the house that is left. So we continued. And then more and more getting closer to the house. Until 2017, the house had been washed away. That is the foundation of that house that we've been showing. And that is what happened. So after 2017, we decided that we're not going to go through with the Google images again. We want to take on real, drone images to see what we will get. So at the end of the groin, when we had the groin, the last groin, what we realized is that the ocean was being, the land was being eroded. And you find out that the erosion between December 2017 to 14th of April 2018, about 25 meters were eroded. I saw a place where they said 2 meters or 2 meters every year. In Lagos, it's much more than 2 meters every year that is being eroded. And that's the reality. And in all of this erosion, these are not just things happening. These are numbers with people involved in it. And it continued to show, because from here, from the 14th of April to the 6th of July, 10 meters were further eroded. Now I want you to watch this. And I want you to look at that house here. And check out the next slide. That is that house. Let me repeat it. That is that house. So all of the houses around here are all gone. And going with this is the fact that the beachhead is being eroded as well. Going to the areas that have been sandfilled, one of the menaces that we observe in coastal areas where wetlands that developers consider as wastelands, they are sandfilling it inappropriately and causing a lot of issues. So that's some of the things that we are experiencing. Then further down towards the east, there's something also happening. If you notice, the same period, we lost 22 meters from the 14th of April to the 6th of July. This area is called, this area is called Lafiaji. There's something instructive about this. This is still the same picture. I want you to picture this very well. As at August 25th, 2022, this red line is in the ocean. That's the reality. And with all of this, you can see these houses. Sometimes, as we've been hearing, in one night, one fell swoop, wave will just come and move everybody. That is the reality of what is happening in this area. And I want you to go along with me still yet. So within 4 years, 128 meters have been lost. So if you look at it every year, 128 meters, that you're talking about 30 to 40 meters every year. That is our reference house. Please just have a look at that reference house. This picture was taken in July 2021. This is 25th August 2022. That same house. And this is within the time frame. This is no longer satellite images. This is what we are doing currently. And we're tracking currently. And that is the reality. Now we stopped saying what is going on. And we tried to let's do a projection. With what we have seen in the past 4 years, what will happen? What is the likely scenario in the next 4 years if it continues at this rate? Then we found out that if we measure 128 meters, it will be on that red line by 2026. However, this is only possible if we have everything being the same. But we know that from what we know, the beachhead is not as high. It's flatter than what it used to be. The wave intensity is increasing. And that means that we may even go before the 2026. We may find the ocean in one major expressway. And that may have submerged our conservation center. And what is the solution? There's no one-size-fits-all solution. An aggregation of possible solutions from different angles is possible, is something that we can do. Is there a combination of green, brown, gray, human? When you talk about the green infrastructure, talking about mangroves, landscape restoration. For instance, the Lekki Conservation Center that I'll be talking about very briefly, or the brown infrastructures or the gray infrastructures, remember how you look at it. We have the groins and then the human way of handling it, relocating humans. But quickly, let's talk about the Lekki Conservation Center. The Lekki Conservation Center is a 78-hectare land that is just beside the ocean. Now, when we got this place 30 years ago, this was how it was. And this is how it is now. Now we're trying to refurbish the boardwalk where people walk in. Formerly, you can stand on the beginning and see towards the end. But now it's all covered. And this is a way of telling people that when you allow nature, nature will take care of itself. And this is our laboratory that will bring people over to come and see what is happening here. However, we also have our own issues. We went back to Google and checked. This is Google in 2001. This is how Lekki Conservation Center was. 10 years later, we are becoming a green island. And then 2019 and 2022. You don't want to see what 2023 looks like because all of these places are all now built up. To the extent that the outlet of our water that connects to these and flows into the lagoon has been blocked such that we accept so much water much more than we have been doing. But if we don't have something like this, then you can imagine what will be the situation along the coastline. So this is one of the solutions, homegrown solution that we can proffer in trying to ensure that our coastlines are protected. But the problem with green infrastructure is that because they are slow to grow, we got this to this level that we are in 30 years. before we get to 30 years, the erosion from the coast will have caught up with us. So that is why there's need for intervention in the brown infrastructure. Then the green infrastructure will follow as a sustainability plan and as you sustain your efforts. And I love this picture because the mangroves are meant to protect us. But by the time we clear the mangroves and distort the microhabitat of the coastline, that is what happens. Because nature has put powerful engineering in mangroves so that mangroves will be able to protect our coastline. But we have distorted it. So we are the engineers of our issues. But we have to live with it and see how we can manage the situation that we find ourselves. Another example I want to give quickly when we talk about security issues is one of the work that we did or we are currently doing, what we call the Hadejanguru wetlands, is an example of a wetlands complex in the northeastern part of the country, talking about security issues and how climate change is intertwined with security issues, not just about the human security, but also food security. And we intervene in the Hadejanguru wetlands. These wetlands hold over 65 species of migratory and resident birds. As at the last time we did a count, we counted over 195,000 individuals of birds that utilize the wetlands. So it's a very important wetland. It's an oasis. When you move from the Sahara and you come into the Sahel, this is one of the first oases that you meet. So we accept a lot of bird species there, migrating from Europe. This is a pictorial representation of how the wetlands looks like. And it is instructive to note that it was actually one of the tributaries of the Lake Chad. And in case you don't know, the Lake Chad has lost its size up to 95%. We've been hearing about 95% 10 years ago, so I'm sure now it will be around 8%. And if you know the history of Nigeria, that is where Boko Haram, the insurgency, is happening because people have lost their livelihoods. Fisher folks have lost their livelihoods. And that's the reality of the impact of climate change. So what did we do in intervening in these projects? These are local communities, and that's the taifa grass. Taifa is an invasive species, and it blocks the waterway. And that is why it's good to harness local knowledge. When we go, we just try to clear the taifa grass, but the locals told us that if you clear taifa from the top, the next 2-3 days, it will start growing back. So with their local knowledge, they say you should cut it from the bottom, such that water goes into the stem and it will die off. That is harnessing local knowledge. And by the time we did that, we were able to get 30 kilometers cleared. And with that clearance, there was fish increase because there are fisher folks as well. 50 to 60% increase of fish. Over 10,000 households were saved because when it rains, there was a free flow of water. It no longer floods. And in connection to that, there's the restoration of degraded landscape. Because we found out that there is this clash between the farmers and the herders. So there's a need to have woodlots and also have areas of grazing so that there won't be clash between farmers and herders. And also we provided livelihoods because some of the farmers or some of them normally hunt the wild birds. And the wild birds are needed to be able to fertilize the water that the fish feed on. So it is all intertwined and they need to do it. Some of them were trained on how to raise poultry. Some of them were trained on beekeeping. For the women, there's a dome palm that instead of cutting the dome palm, they were taught how to harness the palm front and made mats out of it. And also we rebeaconed the grazing routes between the farmers and herders so that there won't be that clash. And this was a letter that was written by one of the village heads. And I just want to read the latter part of that letter. It says, also, both parties are living in peace and harmony in the area, and there's a lot of development financially and socially, And everyone is now free to do his own occupation without the interference of the other in the environment. Once more, we thank you very much for this positive effort. That's from the village head. That's what happens when we collaborate with the locals. We didn't go there and impose our so-called solutions to them. We had discussion with them. Homegrown solutions. We're able to have that discussion with them, and getting them involved cannot be overemphasized. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what we have done in trying to see how, when we live with climate change in Nigeria, what are the solutions that we can bring? This is not all the solution. This is just one of the suggestions that we can bring. And it's left for us to think about the various components, about the health issues I talked about, flooding, about the migration, the forced migration, and that leads to farmer-herder clashes. And I think we've had over 90,000 people have been killed and over 100 displaced from their ancestral land, and it's still going on even as I speak to you. So it is a real and present danger. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. I think these talks really highlighted a lot of the conversations that we've been having in the last few days. So maybe I'll start it off with a question to both of you and pass it to Emmanuel, and then we'll open to questions. There are microphones that can go around if you have a question. So both of you, I think, were very clear in articulating the need for local solutions and the fact that there will not be a sort of one-size-fits-all. And I think one of the challenges around the conversation to do with climate change has been the over-reliance on large global models and projections over long timescales and over large spatial areas that, give a terrifying picture of the future, but they don't actually address how people will experience climate change and what it means for addressing some of these critical issues, including, livelihoods, nutrition, and so on. And so I wanted to ask both of you to just speak a little bit about mechanisms that we can find, not just for empowering communities and using their knowledge to help us solve problems across the global south and nationally as well, but also how we can bring the conversation at the global level to the communities themselves. So I think one of the challenges that we face is that often there may be local solutions, but that's not discussed in Geneva at the World Health Organization or, at Davos at the World Economic Forum. How can we elevate communities and local solutions to a global platform, especially when local solutions will necessarily be different in different places? So that's to both of you.
I think that's a really important question. Part of the problem is that donor funding is also global. And donor funding and priorities of donors are based on global assessments. And so this current fight that's going on between adaptation and mitigation and which is more important is very much a donor-driven agenda. Rather than saying, okay, what's the priorities in Nigeria and how do we support those priorities? It becomes, what's the priorities in Washington and how does Nigeria fit those priorities? So it's that flip which is needed. And governments haven't been, local governments haven't been strong enough in saying, this is what we want. And it's partly a capacity problem at the government level, and at the local level in being able to identify and articulate those problems. And when they do, it's seen, India is such a big country, it's got 1.2 billion people, but if I put out a case of, here's something that's happening in India, it's seen as one case study. It's not seen as this is part of a global solution and 1.2 billion people are facing this issue. And if there's another case study from a Pacific island, the Pacific island case study and the Indian case study are put together. and there's no scale issue involved. There's the magnitudes are not corrected for. And that's why we're running into this global versus local issue. And I think a strong NGO capacity, strong civil society capacity in country can help identify what local problems are and then escalate them to a global level. And the media can play a big role in this also. So there are lots of ways one can think about it. But I think being able to admit to ourselves that a lot of our reaction in developing countries is being driven by priorities from outside is the most important.
We see the same in academia, actually, also, where you can get a very high-profile paper if it's a global model of something, but not if it's seen as a niche case study, even regardless of how many people it might affect.
So I think one of the things is the democratization of the funding mechanism so that people can have their say. We're discussing with Peter from Ghana. He said he's at the crossroad now because he goes to the community and they've shown him a solution to an issue. And it's worked. They've seen it work. But that solution does not sit nicely with the objectives of the donors. And that solution that they are trying to impose have been tried somewhere else and it did work and the communities know about it and they're pointing it to him that we know this solution did not work, so why are you forcing us? So he's at the crossroad. So the democratization of the funding mechanism will go a long way to ensure that people's voices are being heard. I think so yesterday, Prof and I were talking about the need to have another COP for indigenous people. After the scientists have come to speak all the jargons, and then the indigenous people will come with their own homegrown solution to be able to discuss it so that their voices will be heard at the global stage. Except that is done, we will continue to see this top-down approach, which has not really helped. And by the time you do a top-down approach, we will continue to see issues of funding being billions of dollars are being released. But these billions of dollars don't trickle down to where the action should be happening. The billions of dollars are going to consultants to do a modeling, and other consultants are hired to critique that model, not modeling that has been done, and our consultants are hired to write a report on the modeling, the critique that has been done. So at the end of the day, money doesn't go down to where the action should happen. And sometimes you don't need so much of that money to get down before you start seeing action happening. So we need to flip the model where the community's voice needs to be heard. Yes, it may need some packaging. It needs some scientific adaptation here and there and trying to format it here and there. But to just discard it, no. So there's a need to take the communities along. And that indigenous knowledge, it will help us to go far.
I agree. And especially it's striking that the low-tech solution that the community comes up with is surely going to be more sustainable than a consulting-led drone project to do something that is never going to work well. Thank you. I'm going to pass it to Emmanuel for first question, and then we can...
And then we can open up.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me... my question is speaking to food production, but it's going to go differently because there was a different focus. So in much of Africa, perhaps also in South Asia, much of food production is done by smallholders. And I was very interested in your discussion about agrivoltaics and how it sort of comes into conversation, especially with smallholders. And you were talking about the need to place these solar panels around and how to place them because of, without sacrificing arable land or farmland. So I wanted to hear you speak a little bit about that and the leveraging of technology in the context of smallholder production. And then when I go to Joseph, when you talked about fishing, it was interestingly in the Sahel with the Hadia Nguru and how after the sort of reconstruction or rehabilitation of the environment, fishing was thriving. But you didn't talk about fish when you looked at the coastline, where we would have expected to see fishing. Are we giving up on artisanal marine fishing? And what are the implications, since we've both talked about food and the importance of nutrition? So those are my questions.
I'll be able to answer the agrovoltaics and small farmer question much better a year from now. But let me take a shot at the hypothesis that I have right now, because that's what we're trying to look at in India. So the capacity to actually generate electricity that feeds back into the grid is not a capacity for small farmers, right? And that's something a private company would want to do. So it's a question of saying, how do you create a marriage between a private company that's going to put the infrastructure in place that generates solar power that feeds back into the grid, and then how do you then create co-benefits for small farmers and allow these solar power panels to be within that vicinity of the small-scale agriculture system and provide benefits from that electricity generation and the returns from selling the power into the grid to flow back into the community. That's how we would see it. We'd see this as a community-level action with a private sector entity coming in and putting in place the infrastructure to make that happen. So this is our theory. And we are now trying to identify a mechanism by which we can actually implement something like this. There's a lot of agrovoltaic technical knowledge out there, but none of it has been done in a small farm setting. So this is what we are trying to move forward on.
Thank you. Joseph.
So we considered inland fishing and in the Sahel because that is a major livelihood issue for us. We didn't consider inland, the coastal fishing, because the area we're looking at were not very active in fishing. Rather, they were active in ecotourism. Okay. And then their beaches were being eroded. Okay. The beaches that were left, the small sand that was left, as at after you came and left, that was in September, yeah. After you left in September, we went there recently, and all of those places are gone. Even the little sand that were left, even with the groins. So that is their livelihood that has been affected. In the mornings, when you're driving towards the beach, you find young men standing at the collecting toll. But while I was approaching, I didn't see any of them. It was when I got to the beach, I realized why. Because there was no need to collect toll. The beaches were gone. So it's the livelihood issues. So the livelihood could be fishing, but also could be tourism. And others could be something more sustainable, a form of livelihood. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I ask one more question?
Please.
So I want to ask you both, we talk about, can we make rice more efficient? Can we, build green spaces that will protect the coastline? Do you ever foresee a tipping point where this is no longer an option? We simply cannot continue to either make things more efficient or adapt to the situation as it is, and there needs to be a genuine shift, whole transition away from lifestyles as they are currently lived. Do you plan for this? How do we even think about that as a future? Or is it not a worthwhile exercise? Is that something that policymakers in your region are considering? How do we even start to grapple with that idea? And that's for both of you.
You go first.
Okay. Even with the current situation that we have, the politicians have not been able to grapple with the reality that they are seeing. So rethinking it is very difficult from the reality we are seeing on the ground. I used to tell people that when we say environmental protection, we don't actually say, we don't actually mean environmental protection, because the environment will always take care of itself. The environment will always protect itself, but at what costs? Certainly sometimes to be at human costs, be at lost, property lost, and so on. So what I'm trying to say is that it will continue to change if we don't change our habits. So it will get to a point whereby whatever mitigation measures, adaptation measures we are trying to may not work. And as you said, we'll have to flip it and change lifestyles. But that will come at a huge human, economic, and even social cost. Sometimes even cultural cost. Because some people will lose their culture completely, because they will not be able to practice what they've been practiced in ages past.
So how do we prepare for this? This possibility.
It's we'll continue to talk about it and hoping that the people who have the power to do something will realize it. Because sometimes we speak to the choir.
Right.
We speak to ourselves. And when you invite the politicians, they are looking at the next time they are at their next meeting. So whatever you are saying, we're just passing over them. So if they are not directly involved in it, then it becomes difficult. I don't know about your politicians here, but politicians back home, sometimes it's difficult to be able to make them see that thing if it's not directly affecting them. So we'll continue to talk. We'll continue to talk until, just like the slide I showed, when an estate of one of the prominent guys was being threatened, they acted. So until their interest is being threatened, then we may not see that. But we are hoping that we'll find leaders who will be more altruistic than the ones that we have. So we'll keep on talking.
So I think we're at a tipping point already. If you land in Delhi today, you can't even see where you're going. The pollution levels are so high at this time of the year. And all of my colleagues from India can tell you more than I can, that living in Delhi at this time of the year is almost impossible. And how long will you keep doing that? And the discussions around what to do is very clear. The discussions around what to do is you have to change the way rice is produced in Punjab and Haryana, the neighboring states of India. And with that, that's the only way in which you're going to see a permanent change in pollution in Delhi at harvest time. And I think the politicians know that this is the way to do it. But in democracies, political change is slow. But it'll have to happen. And much of that rice produced in Punjab and Haryana is actually shipped out to the eastern parts of India and the central parts of India as part of the subsidized food distribution system of India. And so the discussion today in India is, how do we reform the food distribution system? How do you create local procurement systems? How do you diversify the food basket and the subsidized food systems in a way in which you reduce the importance of Punjab and Haryana and distribute this across the country? And that's a discussion that's ongoing. And I suspect another year or 2 or 3 of living with this high pollution will make that change happen. I suspect after the next round of elections, etc., one would have to start saying, this is it, this is the time to do it.
Why don't we open up for your question? So if you could sort of show by hand, and then, okay, so why don't we take maybe a couple? So Peter is one, and then, yes, and then, okay, and then we'll come to you. So we'll take 3 questions.
I saw
and
3.
then, so I've seen 3 hands. So let's go Peter, and then you, and then Madame, and then you can respond. Okay.
So thank you very much. And this is to a follow-up to what Joe said. Joseph, don't you think that beyond just talking about it and advocating, There could be other forms like social pressure, political pressure, to get leaders to respond to what researchers have found and what science have shown, and even to adapt what local people themselves believe that is the right thing to do. I'm saying this because I had opportunity of doing some small little work, research. I was looking at political party manifestos in Ghana as against climate change. And I looked at the major political parties, the smaller political parties. And you'll be surprised that major political parties only had 1 or 2 lines on environment in general. Then I looked at members of parliament, the messages that they've been putting out there. And you find nothing on environment, not to talk of climate. So the question is, how do people hold these people accountable when they come on those platforms to campaign for their votes? Do they see environment as one of the important pillars that leaders should be telling them what they'll be doing to solve the problem? Just as they'll be quick to ask them, what are you doing to construct this road, to build the hospital, the school, and the rest? Do they question them about the environment? Do they see that as a very important part of their life? I think that a civil society organization like yours can educate people to begin to consider some of these things and then to integrate them into our whole political system. That will put social pressure. That will put political pressure. Because we cannot say that we only talk about it until they decide. No, that is not going to work. So I just wanted to know, what do you think about some of these things from a civil society point of view?
Okay, thank you. The gentleman in green, yes.
Thank you very much, especially for this enlightening discussion. So Prabhu Sahib, when you were talking, to me it sounded like a deja vu. I remember I was 14-year-old, only English-speaking kid in maybe 15 villages. So these people from Kansas State, Iowa State, and Peace Corps will come around 66, 67, and tell us how efficiency and productivity will increase if we adopt green revolution. 50, 60 years down the road, we are in a mess. So I come from a farming family. So our solution is to actually de-link from 2 institutions. One is the central state of India, and other is market. So we did this experiment in our own village. My village is relatively big, 10,000 people. 20 years ago, it was only known for 2 things, addiction and murders. But we got everyone together. And we solved so many problems. And this is generally the feeling of farmers in Punjab. If we can get rid of the central Indian state from our lives and the market, we can not only solve the problem of agriculture, but also environmental issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then, yes.
Hello. Thank you for sharing your important work with us. My name is Evelyn. I'm a student at the law school. My question is that in what ways do you think law can be a part of the problem or the solution in building these cross-sectoral synergies or vertical synergies between top-down and bottom-up approaches to legislation and regulation in your respective spheres of work? Thank you.
Thank you. I know you like to toss the coin, but who's going first?
Let me go first. Let me pick on Peter's comment. It is said that politicians campaign in literature, but govern in prose. what they say usually, it is not what they eventually do when they get there. And sometimes they'll say all the niceties for you to vote them in. And after that, the last campaign that we had in Nigeria was very interesting. When some of the leading political candidates were asked about their climate change agenda, one said he doesn't even believe in climate change. So, but that does not mean the talking, I say, we'll continue to talk. We put pressure as well, the way that we can. I give an example. Cross River State is one of the states in Nigeria that has one of the last remaining rainforests. And the last governor woke up one day, calls himself a professor of environmental sciences, and says that the old standing trees don't store as much carbon as the newly planted ones. So because of that, he wants to clear the old forests and then plant the smaller ones. We challenged him. He now left that idea. The next thing he wanted to do, he wanted to build a superhighway. The superhighway wanted to build with 10 lanes on this side, 10 lanes on this side, a total of over 120 meters on each side, and through the forest, so that the long and short of what he wanted to do was to log. And at the end of the day, you wonder what kind of load he's going to transport in on that road that will not continue all the way to the Sahara. It will end in the next state because the next state is not prepared to continue that. So we didn't only mobilize internally, we mobilized with our network globally, and we're able to stop that from happening. So we also do that part of advocacy and sometimes even switch on our activist cap to make sure this happens. Talking about the coastal erosion that we're discussing, after you visited and left, we brought in the senator representing that area to come there, the same place you sat down. He sat down there, and I presented the reality on ground. Truly, he accepted the fact that this is the reality these people are going through. And it's majorly, they call them APC. That's the party in government. They are APC members. They voted them. He said he knows what is happening, but his hands are tied. This is a government that has borrowed in the past 5 months. I read in the papers this morning, so our external debt has grown by 75%. They want to buy presidential yacht. They want to buy vehicles for the senators and the first lady's office. That is the priority. So these are the issues that we face, and we'll continue to push. So they know these things. We talk to them about it. They accept it when they meet us, but when they sit in their chambers, it's a different thing. But that notwithstanding, we will continue to put pressure. When we say we are just going to be talking, it's not just the talking, but we also put pressure, look at pressure points, and try to highlight those things. Sometimes the extent of even embarrassing them, because we are NGOs, the government don't give us money, so they cannot dictate how we go about our business. Thank you.
It's hard for an academic to match a storyteller. Let me start on the law issue. There was some discussion earlier today in one of the groups. I was sitting in the South Asia group, that, when you think about legal status, a tenant farmer doesn't have legal status. It's only a landowner who has legal status. The wife doesn't have a legal status compared to the husband. So when you have a bank account, it's in the name of the husband and not in the wife's name, or the property rights are not in the wife's name. So from a law perspective, if we don't address this basic inequity, that you are disempowering the poorest people and this removing any voice from them, then we're not doing justice in a democratic system. So from a legal point of view, I'd like to see the most disempowered to get empowerment through different types of titling, different ways in which you recognize their citizenship. And I'm not quite sure I know what the answer is because I'm not a legal person. But simply saying, if I'm a tenant farmer, I should be getting the same benefits that I would if I was a landowner, would be a good starting point. If I'm a spouse, then having the same legal rights to financial inclusion would be a good starting point. So that's how I would think about it.
The gentleman in green.
I know, I was coming to the gentleman in green. Because the Green Revolution is a really important historical event in India. And I've written a lot about the Green Revolution. And I've tracked the Green Revolution for the past 40 years. And I'll say two things. I'll say the extent to which India has solved the problem of hunger is only because of the enormous investments that India made in increasing productivity of rice and wheat. And that then kick-started a big growth process in India. But it was not enough, that they should have been looking beyond the Green Revolution, looking beyond rice and wheat, looking at other areas that were left behind in India, such as Eastern India, Central India, and identifying ways in which one could have helped farmers in those areas. And that was not done. So much of the focus was on the high productive areas where the Green Revolution was most successful. Second, there was not enough attention paid to the environmental consequences that were very evident from very early on. But there wasn't enough attention to saying, how do we correct those problems? Because with the focus on just increasing the amount of food, it seemed like, okay, we have to sacrifice this. But the sacrifice was too much. And the third point is, if the policy corrections were made very early on, the subsidies around fertilizer, water, power, if these corrections were made in the 80s, we wouldn't be in the place where we are today. I know, but you asked me a question, I'm answering, I'm telling you why I think this happened. If those corrections happened in the 80s, Punjab and Haryana would not be growing rice and wheat today. They may be growing vegetables, fruit, agroforestry products, etc. Rice and wheat would have very quickly moved away into other parts of the country. So they are ifs, but that's where the political economy comes in. In democratic societies, it's so hard to change systems because of very entrenched political lobbies. And that's true in India, that's true in the US, that's true in Europe, everywhere else. Rob Palbach is sitting here, he's a global expert on political economy. He can tell you more than I could ever talk about this.
Should we take one?
Sorry, if I could quickly just talk about law. And you talk about the legal status. You saw the pictures I showed. The people who are affected by coastal erosion are people who don't have legal rights to where they are. They are part of the 1,500 people that migrate into Lagos every day and don't go back. So they just find anywhere to stay. So they can't even put themselves together as a force to be able to demand for their rights because they don't have any. So that is where law can come in, and to be able to help them, because these are human beings that also have human rights, especially a right to life.
I thought we'll take one final round. We'll respond, and that will take us to 7 p.m. and we would have ended our dinner. So
We have a question.
I've seen one there. Maybe is there just maybe a second or third question? Or second question. I like things in threes. Is there possibly a third? Okay, we're good. Okay, we'll start there.
Thank you. I am Smriti. I'm a graduate student at the Kennedy School, and my question to you, Professor Pingali, it's to you. And I am wondering, are we thinking about the unintended consequences of the policies right now, or what we are promoting? Because my skepticism comes from even as recently as when we promoted combine harvester without a straw management system. We are with stubble burning now. So as we promote reinvention and innovation, are we thinking about where this could land us with some of the things that we haven't thought in the next 20 to 30 years?
Thank you. Madam?
Thank you for this wonderful discussion. My question is that we have a market, a global market and a local market, which decides a lot of things. So, I think, agriculture and climate change is so connected to that market. For example, in India, when they're picking potatoes, they say, oh, put it through this bangle. We'll keep it. The corporation will say, we'll take the potato that's this size, and we won't take something else. So that means that you're throwing out something that has been produced. So I think this market question of how the market works and what is production and what is being wasted. And I grew up in England. In Europe, we knew butter was thrown in the sea, because the market decided if there was more than this amount, then we wouldn't get the price. So I think, if we don't connect these things together, then we can't get anywhere, because then somebody else is deciding. So the decisions of the local people are going to, I think, be paramount. If we don't go there, then if we're just looking at the market and the market is deciding, I think there's failure and more failure going to happen. Thank you.
Hi, thank you guys so much for being here and for hosting this event too. My name is Anna. I'm an undergraduate at the college, and I'm also kind of reporting on this event for the Harvard Crimson. So my question was mainly kind of in regards to how we can continue to push global leaders and especially local governments to action. So I was wondering if you believe that we would need countries like specifically the US, because I feel like that's what I'm more familiar with in regards to environmental policy, to kind of make a first step, or we would need global institutions like the United Nations to have some sort of ordinance or to issue some kind of statement, or if you believe that local governments have that power and have those resources to kind of make those first steps on their own.
Okay. It's my turn?
Yes.
Unintended consequences, I think that's an excellent question. And I think it's important for us to remember that we didn't keep an eye on the ball last time around, or even the last few times around, and did not monitor the consequences, and therefore created the problems that we ended up with. And I suspect there will be unintended consequences for every action. And I don't see any action anywhere that doesn't have a consequence that's not intended. Unintended can be good and bad, can be either way. But the only way you can address it is if we recognize that there will be consequences and that we have to keep putting in place systems for measuring and having metrics that can measure what the change is, and then take corrective actions to that. I'm not sure we're doing that at this time either, and I think that's a good reminder that we should be doing that. On the market issue, I think that it's a combination of market and policy. One of the reasons why Europeans threw butter into the ocean was because the policy environment had put in huge amount of subsidies in dairy production, which ended up with huge oversupply of dairy products, which then ended up in the sea. They could have actually gone into food aid programs or something like that, but they ended up in the sea. So it was not just the market, but that combination of market and policies that created that. And I suspect it's the same situation in India, that it's that combination that's leading to many of the issues.
And also prices.
Yeah, and that's related to that, yeah. Definitely. And on where the change is coming from, you know, which state was it where young people went out and sued the government? Montana was? Montana. That was a big change, and it came from youth who decided we've had enough. So I don't believe, I'm a former UN employee, and I don't believe the change is going to come from the UN. Sorry, I'm being recorded there. But
we'll delete that part.
I don't believe it's going to come from the UN. I think it's going to come from the youth, from young people who are going to say, this is enough. We don't want to inherit this mess. We want to change it. And that's your tipping point issue. The tipping point is also going to be from young people saying, we want to change. Not from the rest of us. We can only talk, but the change has to come from you.
Yeah. And just riding on that, because if I will link your question to the last speaker about markets, and you talk about the US, I'm not sure solution is going to come if it doesn't fit their, is it national interest they call it? National interest or strategic national security or something. So it's always, okay, foreign policy, yes, foreign policy interests. So sometimes true altruism is what is missing. And as Prof pointed out, when we get to that tipping point, things will move in their natural course. And usually when we get there, then we'll see things start happening. It will be spontaneous. But we hope that we will be able to make that change or make things happen in a more organized and a more dialogue way than allowing it to take a spontaneous reaction, which usually ends up in chaos and so on, and probably ends up with some unintended consequences, as one of the questions that said. So it's better managed than allowed to take its natural course. Thank you.
Caroline, will you close this out?
I have nothing more to add. I would like to just thank you all for coming. I think it's been a really insightful discussion. Thank you both, our speakers, for your wonderful thoughts and for your presentations. And we'll call a close. Thanks very much.
Thank you.